He was born with a silver spoon so heavy it might as well have been a shovel digging a grave for his own potential. Ethan Vance, heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire, had every advantage money could buy, yet he was a spectacular failure. His father, a titan of industry, gave him test after test in the boardroom, on the trading floor, in the world of high-stakes ventures. Ethan failed them all with a smirk and a shrug. So his father gave him one final brutal test: survive for 1 month with nothing. No money, no name, no help. And on the rain-slick streets of the city he failed at that too. Until a waitress in a worn-out diner taught him the one lesson that would change everything. This isn't just a story about riches to rags. It's about how the poorest man can teach the wealthiest son the true meaning of value. The air in the 80th floor boardroom of Vance Global was so thin and sterile, it felt like it was imported directly from a laboratory. It was an atmosphere designed to suffocate excuses, a place where numbers were deities and profit margins were scripture. Seated at the head of a monolithic obsidian table was Sterling Vance, a man whose presence was as imposing as the Manhattan skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford. His expression was chiseled from granite, and his patience today was non-existent. Across from him, slouching in a chair that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, was his son and heir, Ethan Vance. At 24, Ethan possessed a lazy, aristocratic charm, and the kind of handsome features that made his transgressions seem less severe to everyone but the man sitting before him. His Patek Philippe watch felt heavy on his wrist, a constant reminder of a world he was born into but felt no connection with. He was supposed to be presenting the final projections for the company's new green energy initiative, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition of a solar technology firm, Helios Innovations. So, Sterling's voice was a low rumble devoid of any warmth. The final due diligence report. Walk us through the potential ROI vulnerabilities you've identified, Ethan. The us referred to the two senior VPs flanking Sterling, both men in their late 50s with expressions of feigned neutrality that barely masked their predatory anticipation. They had seen this drama play out before. Ethan blinked, dragging his gaze from a helicopter making its lazy descent towards a nearby helipad. He tapped a key on his tablet, and the massive screen behind his father flickered to life, displaying a complex series of charts and graphs. Right. Vulnerabilities. Ethan began, his tone laced with an almost imperceptible boredom. Well, the primary issue, as I see it, is the projected cost of retrofitting our existing infrastructure to accommodate Helios's patented energy storage system. The numbers here, he waved a dismissive hand at the screen, are optimistic. They don't fully account for union labor disputes, which, let's be honest, are inevitable. One of the VPs, a man named Peterson, with a perpetually pinched face, leaned forward. Mr. Vance, your son's report seems to have overlooked the mitigation strategies outlined by the legal team on page 47 of the main brief. We have a contingency fund allocated specifically for that. Ethan offered a languid smile. Contingency funds are what we create so we can sleep at night, Peterson. They're financial placebos. The reality is the tech is unproven at this scale. We're essentially buying a very expensive science fair project, a very, very expensive one. Sterling's jaw tightened. This was not the sharp, critical analysis of a future CEO. This was the cynical detachment of a bored spectator. The Wharton School of Business presumably taught you to base your conclusions on data, not on glib dismissals. What data are you citing? Ethan's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The truth was, he'd barely read the report. He'd spent the weekend on a yacht off the coast of Monaco, and the report had been an unwelcome intrusion on his Monday morning. He'd skimmed the executive summary and decided to wing it, relying on his natural intelligence and a cultivated air of contrarian brilliance. It was a strategy that had carried him through a life of low stakes, but the stakes were no longer low. The data, Ethan improvised, gesturing vaguely at the screen, is in the volatility of the raw material supply chain. Lithium cobalt. These are sourced from geopolitically unstable regions. Any disruption, any minor coup or trade embargo, and our very expensive science fair project becomes a very expensive paperweight. It was a decent point, one that had indeed been raised and extensively analyzed by teams of experts. But Ethan delivered it without conviction, without the underlying weight of research. He was just throwing darts. Sterling saw it. He saw the emptiness behind the words, the hollow performance. He stood up, his 6'3" frame casting a long shadow across the table. He walked over to the massive window, his back to his son. "Peterson, Henderson, leave us," he commanded. The two VPs scurried out of the room like startled mice, the door closing with a soft, ominous click. Silence descended. For a full minute, Sterling simply stared out at the city he had conquered, a kingdom he had built from nothing but grit and ambition. He had clawed his way up from a working-class neighborhood in Queens, fueled by a relentless hunger to prove himself. He saw that same hunger in the eyes of his competitors, his employees, even the hot dog vendor on the corner. But he had never, not once, seen it in the eyes of his own son. "I gave you every opportunity," Sterling said, his voice dangerously soft. "The best schools, tutors, a seat on the board of a company men would kill for. I handed you projects with training wheels, ventures with safety nets so wide you couldn't possibly fall." He turned around, and his eyes, usually a cold, calculating blue, were blazing with a raw, unfamiliar emotion. It looked like grief. "And you have failed, every single time. Not because you lack the intellect. You have that in spades. You fail because you have no respect for it, for the work, for the struggle. You treat this." He swept his arm, indicating the entire city, the entire empire, like a game you can't be bothered to learn the rules to. Ethan straightened up, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. "Maybe I don't want to play your game. Did you ever consider that maybe I don't want to spend my life in sterile boardrooms arguing about contingency funds?" "And what do you want to do?" Sterling shot back, taking a step closer. "Spend it on yachts, at parties in St. Bart's with people who only tolerate your presence because of the name on your black card. You haven't earned a single thing in your entire life, not even the air you breathe. It's all been provided for you, subsidized, a trust fund existence." "That's not fair," Ethan retorted, his voice rising. "Fair." Sterling laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Fair is what you build with your own two hands. You've never built anything. You've only consumed. So I have designed a new test for you, your final one." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Another internship, a sham project in a developing country so I can find myself. No thanks." "No," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "Nothing so comfortable. You value nothing because you've never known what it is to have nothing. So that is your test. You are going to learn." He walked over to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a simple manila envelope. "Your test begins now, Ethan." The gilded cage was about to swing open, and Ethan Vance had no idea he was not being set free, but being thrown to the wolves. Ethan watched his father with a mixture of disbelief and contempt. A final test. It sounded so dramatic, so ridiculously theatrical. He expected Sterling to hand him the keys to a failing subsidiary in some forgotten corner of Ohio and tell him to turn it around in 6 months. It would be an annoyance, a boring chapter in his otherwise comfortable life, but it would be manageable. Sterling didn't offer him keys. He walked over to Ethan, his movements deliberate and final. "Stand up." Reluctantly, Ethan rose to his feet. Sterling's gaze was intense, scanning his son from head to toe as if he were assessing a piece of faulty equipment. "The watch," Sterling said, his voice flat. "Take it off." Ethan blinked. "What?" "This was your 21st birthday gift to me. The Patek Philippe Nautilus was worth more than most people's homes. It was a gift to the man I hoped you would become. I was mistaken. Put it on the table." A cold knot began to form in Ethan's stomach. This felt different. He slowly unclasped the watch, its weight a sudden absence on his wrist, and placed it on the polished obsidian. The metallic clink echoed in the silent room. The wallet. Ethan's hand went to the back pocket of his trousers. His wallet was handcrafted from Italian leather, containing a platinum credit card, with no theoretical limit, a debit card linked to an endless trust, and about $1,000 in cash for emergencies. He pulled it out and placed it next to the watch. Phone, keys, everything in your pockets. His state-of-the-art smartphone, the keys to his penthouse apartment, and the fob for his Aston Martin DB11 joined the growing pile of his discarded life on the table. He was now standing in a suit that cost $10,000 with nothing but the lint in his pockets. Your suit is a loan, Sterling continued, his voice relentless. As are the shoes. You will be provided with a change of clothes. Something more appropriate for your new station. He gestured towards the manila envelope on his desk. In that envelope you will find $500 in cash. You will also find a one-way bus ticket to a destination unknown to me. I had my assistant pick it at random. You will leave this building, and for the next 30 days, you are to survive. No contact with any friends, family, or company associates. Your bank accounts are frozen. Your name, the Vance name, is now a liability. If you use it to gain any advantage, you will have failed. Ethan stared at his father, his mouth agape. The initial disbelief was rapidly curdling into a furious, panicked rage. You're joking. This is insane. You're throwing me out on the street. I am giving you the one thing I never could, Sterling replied, his face unreadable. An empty slate. A chance to learn the most fundamental lesson of all value. Not stock value, not real estate value. The value of $1 earned through sweat. The value of a meal when you are hungry. The value of a roof over your head when it is raining. You have 30 days. On the 22nd of September at noon, you will meet me at the fountain in Columbus Circle. What you have to show for yourself at that time will determine your future. And if I refuse, Ethan spat, his voice trembling with fury, then your future is already decided. You will be formally and permanently disinherited. Every trust, every account, every tie to this family and this company will be severed. You will be a ghost to me. I will not have a parasite as my legacy. The word parasite struck Ethan like a physical blow. He felt the blood drain from his face, replaced by a hot flush of shame and anger. All his life he had been his father's son, a role that was both a velvet prison and a suit of armor. To have that stripped away so clinically, so cruelly, was unimaginable. You can't do this. He whispered, the words sounding weak even to his own ears. It's already done. Sterling turned away and pressed a button on his desk intercom. Arthur, please come in. Bring the package. A moment later, Sterling's long-serving and impeccably discreet assistant, Arthur, entered the room. He was a thin, balding man who had been a silent fixture in Ethan's life since childhood. He never smiled, and his eyes today held a flicker of something that might have been pity, but it was impossible to be sure. He was carrying a simple brown paper bag. Give it to him, Sterling commanded, not looking at his son. Arthur stepped forward and handed the bag to Ethan. Inside was a pair of worn jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, a faded hoodie, and a pair of scuffed work boots. It was the uniform of a man Ethan would normally never even notice on the street. Go into the private washroom. Change, Sterling ordered. Leave your suit on the floor. It will be disposed of. Numbly propelled by a bizarre sense of inevitability, Ethan walked into the opulent marble bathroom adjoining the office. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, the perfectly styled hair, the handsome face now pale with shock, the expensive clothes that clung to him like a second skin. He felt like a stranger in his own body. Slowly he stripped off the armor of his old life, the silk shirt, the tailored trousers, the handmade leather shoes. He left them in a heap on the cold marble floor and pulled on the rough, unfamiliar clothes from the bag. The jeans were stiff, the t-shirt was coarse, and the boots felt heavy and clumsy. He looked at his reflection again. The illusion was shattered. The clothes didn't just change his appearance, they seemed to change his very posture. He was no longer Ethan Vance, heir apparent. He was just a man in cheap clothes. When he re-entered the boardroom, Sterling was standing by the desk, his back to him. Arthur was placing the watch, wallet, and keys into a safe behind a painting. "Here," Sterling said, pushing the manila envelope across the desk without turning. "The terms are clear. 30 days. Columbus Circle. Now get out of my building." The finality in his father's voice was absolute. There was no room for appeal, no hope for a last-minute reprieve. Ethan picked up the envelope. The $500 inside felt both insultingly small and terrifyingly large. It was all he had. He walked towards the door, his steps heavy in the unfamiliar boots. He didn't look back. As the door closed behind him, he heard his father's final words. Not to him, but to his assistant, spoken with the cold detachment of a man closing a bad business deal. "Arthur, cancel my son's security clearance. Effective immediately." Ethan didn't take the private elevator down. For the first time in his life, he walked to the public elevator bank, an invisible man in a sea of busy employees who didn't give him a second glance. As he stepped out of the gleaming, climate-controlled lobby of the Vance Global Tower and into the humid, chaotic symphony of a New York City afternoon, the reality of his situation crashed down on him. He was alone. He was anonymous. And he was utterly, hopelessly lost. The first 3 days were a masterclass in failure. Ethan, who had never taken a bus in his life, found himself on a grimy Greyhound heading north, the destination on the ticket reading Albany. He spent the first night in a cheap, soulless motel that smelled of stale cigarettes, and despair blowing nearly $100 of his precious $500. He ate at greasy fast food chains, the unfamiliar food sitting like a lead weight in his stomach. The world, which had always bent to his will, was now aggressively indifferent. His attempts to find work were laughable. He walked into a high-end clothing boutique, the kind he used to frequent as a customer, and asked for a job. The manager took one look at his scuffed boots and worn jeans and dismissed him with a condescending smirk. He tried a bookstore where the young woman behind the counter asked him about his favorite authors, and he could only stammer the names of writers he'd been forced to read at Wharton. He didn't get the job. By the 5th day, his pride, a fortress he thought was impenetrable, had been reduced to rubble. He was down to $200, having wasted money on foolish comforts and bad decisions. The nights were getting colder, and he found himself sleeping on a bench in a small city park, using his hoodie as a pillow, and the rustling leaves as a blanket. The gnawing hunger in his belly was a constant, brutal reminder of his new reality. It wasn't the abstract hunger for success his father spoke of. It was a primal, humiliating need that consumed his every thought. On the evening of the 6th day, a cold, persistent drizzle began to fall. Soaked and shivering, Ethan wandered aimlessly through a part of the city where the buildings were older and the streetlights cast long, lonely shadows. The smell of fried onions and coffee drew him towards a small, brightly lit diner on a street corner. The sign above the door in faded neon letters read, "The Corner Spoon." Through the rain-streaked window he could see it was a simple place. Worn linoleum floors, red vinyl booths, and a long formica counter. It was warm and alive, a stark contrast to the cold misery of the street. He had $63 left to his name. The thought of spending any of it on a single meal was agonizing, but the pull of warmth and the promise of hot food were too strong to resist. He pushed open the door, a small bell tinkling overhead, and stepped inside. Every head at the counter turned to look at him, the newcomer, the outsider. He felt a dozen pairs of eyes sizing him up, noting his damp clothes and unkempt appearance. He quickly slid into an empty booth in the corner, trying to make himself as small as possible. A waitress emerged from the kitchen, a notepad in her hand. She looked exhausted. Her dark hair was pulled back in a slightly messy ponytail. There were faint shadows under her eyes, but those eyes were sharp and intelligent. They missed nothing. Her name tag read Izzy. She stopped at his booth, her expression neutral. "Coffee!" "Yes, please." Ethan mumbled, his voice hoarse. She poured a cup of dark, steaming liquid into a thick ceramic mug and set it down in front of him. "Menus on the wall. Let me know when you know." She started to turn away. "Wait," Ethan said a bit too loudly. He didn't know what he was going to say. He was desperate. "Are you—" Are you hiring? Izzy stopped and turned back, one eyebrow raised in skepticism. She looked him up and down again, more slowly this time. He looked like trouble. Another drifter who'd work for a day, get his pay, and disappear. Or worse. For what? She asked, her tone wary. You a cook? No. You a server? No. Then what exactly do you think we'd be hiring you for? The old Ethan would have made a sarcastic remark. He would have used his charm, his wit, to try and maneuver the situation. But that Ethan was gone, washed away by 6 days of cold hunger and humiliation. Anything, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I'll wash dishes. I'll mop the floors. I'll take out the trash. I need a job. The plea was raw and undisguised, and the sincerity of it seemed to surprise her. She studied his face for a long moment. He didn't have the hardened look of a man who'd spent his life on the streets. His hands, though dirty, were uncalloused. His speech, despite his current state, was educated. There was a story there, and her curiosity was piqued. Sal, our dishwasher, quit yesterday, walked out mid-shift, she said more to herself than to him. Left us in a real bind. She chewed on the end of her pen, her eyes narrowing as she considered him. You ever worked a dish pit before? No, Ethan admitted. But I'm a fast learner. Izzy let out a short, cynical laugh. Everyone says that. The dish pit chews up fast learners and spits them out. It's hot, it's loud, and it never stops. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping. Look, the owner's not here, but I can make a call. I'll tell you what, I'll give you a meal. On me. A grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup. You eat it, and then you can work a trial shift tonight. For 3 hours. If you can keep up and you don't break anything, we'll talk. If you can't, she shrugged, then you got a free meal and we're even. Deal. Ethan stared at her. A free meal. A chance. It was more generosity than he had been shown in his entire life from a total stranger. It was a lifeline. Deal, he said, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made him dizzy, washing over him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Izzy said, a faint smile touching her lips for the first time. You haven't met Sal's ghost yet. We call him the Greasy Spectre. She scribbled something on her notepad, tore off the sheet, and stuck it to the rotating order wheel. Eat up. Your new life begins in about 10 minutes. As she walked away, Ethan wrapped his cold hands around the warm mug of coffee. He had just hit rock bottom, but in the unexpected kindness of a tired waitress in a corner diner, he felt the first tentative glimmer of hope. He didn't know it yet, but his real education, the one that truly mattered, was about to begin. The kitchen of the Corner Spoon was a chaotic inferno. It was a world away from the calm order of the dining area. A cramped, steamy space filled with the clatter of pans, the hiss of the grill, and the shouted orders of the head cook, a burly, heavily tattooed man named Frank. At the very back, in the dimmest and wettest corner, was the dish pit. It was a stainless steel monstrosity of sinks, spray hoses, and a rumbling ancient dishwasher that sounded like a jet engine preparing for takeoff. This was Ethan's new classroom. His trial began the moment he finished the last spoonful of soup. Izzy led him back, handed him a thick stained apron, and gave him a 30-second tutorial. Hot water here, cold here. Scrape the solids into this bin. Spray them down with this hose. Stack them in these racks, plates here, bowls here, silverware in the cylinders. When a rack is full, slide it in the machine, push this big green button. When it buzzes, pull it out. Don't touch the dishes, they're hotter than hell. Let them cool over here. The main thing is to keep up. Frank needs clean pans. I need clean plates. If we run out, we're all screwed. Got it. Ethan nodded, his head spinning. It seemed simple enough. It was not. The first wave of dirty dishes arrived like an invading army. A busboy slammed down 2 heavy gray tubs filled with a precarious mountain of plates, caked in ketchup bowls smeared with gravy, and coffee cups stained brown. Ethan stared at the mess, momentarily paralyzed. Let's go, college boy. Move it, Frank yelled from the grill without even looking at him. Ethan jumped into action, grabbing a plate and starting to scrape. The work was disgusting and relentless. The hot water and steam made him sweat, plastering the cheap t-shirt to his skin. The noise was deafening. Within 20 minutes his back ached. His hands were red and raw, and the mountain of dirty dishes had not shrunk. It had grown. He was falling behind. He tried to go faster, fumbling with a stack of wet plates. One slipped from his grasp, shattering on the tile floor with a deafening crash. The entire kitchen went silent. Frank turned around slowly, a spatula in his hand, his eyes burning holes into Ethan. "That's coming out of your pay," Frank growled. "If you even last long enough to get any." Ethan's face burned with humiliation. He bent down to clean up the shards, his hands shaking. This was so much harder than it looked. It wasn't about intellect or strategy. It was about pure, grueling physical effort and a rhythm he just couldn't find. Izzy appeared at his side, holding another tub of dishes. Instead of yelling at him, she set the tub down and picked up the spray hose. "You're trying to do too much at once," she said, her voice calm but firm amidst the chaos. "Stop thinking. Just do. Scrape, spray, stack. Find a rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Scrape, spray, stack." She demonstrated her movements, economical and practiced. There was no wasted motion. She wasn't just washing dishes. She was managing a system. Ethan watched her mesmerized. She saw the flow, the connections he was missing. "And stop treating them like just dishes," she added, stacking a rack with incredible speed. "Every plate is a customer. Mrs. Gable in booth 4, she likes her coffee cup extra clean. The Henderson kids in booth 2 always leave a mountain of syrup, so you gotta spray those twice. You're not just cleaning up, you're getting ready for the next person. You're part of the reason they come back." Ethan stared at her. Every plate is a customer. The concept was entirely foreign to him. In his father's world, customers were data points on a chart, demographics to be targeted, wallets to be opened. They were abstractions. Here in this greasy, loud kitchen, Izzy was telling him that Mrs. Gable's coffee cup mattered. It was a test he had never encountered before, the test of seeing the person behind the transaction. He took a deep breath and tried again, mimicking Izzy's rhythm. Scrape, spray, stack. He focused on one plate at a time, thinking of it not as a chore, but as a task with a purpose. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to catch up. The mountain of dishes began to shrink. By the end of his 3-hour trial, he was exhausted, soaked and sore in muscles he didn't know he had. But the dish pit was clear. He had survived. Izzy came back, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at the clean station, then at him. "You didn't run away screaming. That's a start," she said, a hint of approval in her voice. "The job pays minimum wage cash at the end of each week. You get 1 meal per shift. You're on time, you do the work, you don't break stuff, and you stay. That's all we ask." "I'll take it," Ethan said, his voice filled with a gratitude that was profound and overwhelming. The days that followed blurred into a routine of grueling work. Ethan learned the names of the staff: Frank, the intimidating but fair cook; Maria, the quiet, middle-aged prep cook who always saved him a piece of pie; and the other servers who initially viewed him with suspicion but slowly began to accept him. His classroom was the diner, and his teacher was Izzy. She taught him more than how to wash dishes. She taught him through her own example the meaning of a hard day's work. He saw her run herself ragged for 8-hour shifts, always with a kind word for the elderly regulars, always with a patient smile for the families with screaming children. She worked 2 jobs. He learned waiting tables at the diner and cleaning offices late at night, all while taking online classes at a community college. She was studying to be a social worker. One evening, during a quiet lull, he found her sitting in a booth poring over a thick textbook. "What are you studying?" he asked, wiping down the counter. "Abnormal psychology," she replied, not looking up. "Trying to understand why people do the things they do." "And have you figured it out?" She finally looked up, her eyes tired but clear. "Some of it. I think a lot of people are just trying to feel like they matter. Like their small corner of the world is better because they're in it." She looked around the diner. Frank matters because he makes the best damn pancakes in the city. Maria matters because her soups can cure anything from a cold to a broken heart. The customers matter because this place gives them a sense of community. She looked at him directly. You matter, Ethan, because if those dishes aren't clean, this whole place grinds to a halt. He had never thought of it that way. He had always associated mattering with the size of a deal, the number of zeros on a check, the headline in the Wall Street Journal. Her definition was quieter, more profound. It was about contribution, not acquisition. It was a test of value, and for the first time in his life, Ethan felt like he was beginning to understand the question. He wasn't just washing dishes. He was earning his place. He was learning to matter. 3 weeks passed. The soft, uncalloused hands of Ethan Vance, the man who once considered signing a document to be a strenuous activity, were now tough and perpetually water-wrinkled. The perpetual slouch of boredom in his posture was replaced by the weary strength of someone who spent 10 hours a day on his feet. He had moved out of the park and into a tiny Spartan room above a laundromat, paying his rent weekly with the cash he earned at the diner. It wasn't much, but it was his. Every dollar represented a stack of clean plates, a mopped floor, a trash can hauled to the curb. He was no longer just the dishwasher. He was becoming part of the diner's ecosystem. He learned how to do basic prep work for Maria when he was caught up peeling potatoes and chopping onions until his eyes watered. He learned to anticipate Frank's needs, having a clean skillet ready before the cook even had to ask. He even learned the names and orders of the regulars. Mr. Henderson, the retired mailman, got decaf and a bran muffin. The construction crew that came in at noon wanted 3 orders of the lumberjack special and a pitcher of iced tea. His relationship with Izzy deepened, evolving from a mentor-mentee dynamic into a quiet, comfortable friendship. They rarely talked about their pasts. His was a lie he couldn't tell, and hers was a struggle she didn't feel the need to broadcast. Instead, they talked about the present, the absurdities of their customers. Frank's latest temper tantrum, a difficult chapter in her psychology textbook. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, the diner was nearly empty. Ethan was restocking napkin dispensers while Izzy sat in a booth highlighting passages in a book. "Why social work?" Ethan asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "You're smart enough to do anything. You could be a lawyer, a businesswoman." Izzy looked up, a small, wry smile on her face. "And spend my life in an office trying to make rich people richer. No thanks. I've seen enough of what happens to people when they fall through the cracks. My mom, she got sick when I was in high school. She lost her job, then we lost our apartment. We got tangled in a system that's designed to confuse you, to wear you down until you just give up. One person, a social worker, helped us navigate it. She treated my mom with dignity. She fought for her. She made a difference." She closed the book and looked at Ethan, her gaze direct. "Making $1 billion is impressive, I guess. But helping one family keep their home, helping one person feel seen and respected, that's a different kind of value, isn't it? That's the kind of wealth I'm interested in." Her words resonated with him in a way his father's lectures on market caps and shareholder value never had. Sterling Vance built skyscrapers that changed the skyline, but this woman with her 2 jobs and her online classes was trying to rebuild lives. One was about power, the other was about purpose. The bell above the door tinkled, and both of them looked up. A man in a flawlessly tailored Brioni suit stepped inside, looking profoundly out of place. He held a phone to his ear, his voice a low, commanding murmur. He exuded an aura of wealth and arrogance that was painfully familiar to Ethan. As the man turned his head, Ethan's blood ran cold. It was Gregory Shaw. Shaw was a notoriously ambitious senior vice president at Vance Global, a corporate predator known for his sycophantic devotion to Sterling and his ruthless treatment of everyone else. He was the kind of man who would happily push his own mother down a flight of stairs if it meant a promotion. Ethan ducked behind the counter, his heart hammering in his chest. What was Shaw doing here in Albany? It had to be a coincidence. A business trip, perhaps. He prayed Shaw wouldn't see him. "Can I help you?" Izzy asked, walking up to the man with her professional server's smile. Shaw lowered his phone, his eyes scanning the humble diner with unconcealed disdain. I doubt it. My driver made a wrong turn. Is there a place in this town that serves actual espresso and not this sludgy battery acid? He asked, gesturing dismissively at a coffee pot. There's a cafe a few blocks down, Izzy replied, her smile tightening at the edges. I can give you directions. Never mind, I'll have him figure it out. Shaw's gaze swept the room one last time. His eyes, cold and reptilian, passed right over the counter where Ethan was hiding. And then they snapped back. A slow, cruel smile spread across Gregory Shaw's face. He saw him. He saw the heir to the Vance fortune dressed in a stained apron restocking napkin dispensers in a greasy spoon diner. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. Well, 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 Shaw said, his voice dripping with mock surprise. Ethan Vance, I almost didn't recognize you. Quite a fall from the 80th floor, isn't it? Izzy's head whipped around, her eyes wide with shock as she stared at Ethan. Ethan slowly straightened up, his face pale. His cover was blown. As the small, honest world he had started to build was about to come crashing down. Shaw ended his phone call. I must say I'm impressed. Your father's little character-building exercise seems to be going splendidly. He'll be so interested to hear about this. I'm heading back to the city tonight. I'll be sure to give him a full report. The threat was clear. Shaw wouldn't just report what he saw. He would spin it. He would paint Ethan as a pathetic failure, a disgrace hiding in squalor. He would use this encounter to elevate himself in Sterling's eyes by burying his son. Stay away from my father, Gregory. Ethan said, his voice low and steady, surprising even himself. Shaw laughed. Oh, I don't think so. This is the most fascinating bit of corporate news I've stumbled upon all year. You scrubbing floors. It's poetic. He gave Ethan one last contemptuous look, then turned to leave. At the door he paused and looked back at Izzy. My condolences on your choice of staff, he sneered, and then he was gone. The bell on the door tinkled, signaling his departure. Silence descended on the diner, thick and suffocating. Izzy was still staring at Ethan, her expression a whirlwind of confusion, betrayal, and dawning understanding. Ethan Vance? She whispered, the name sounding foreign and strange. As in Vance Global. The fragile piece of the corner spoon had been shattered. And Ethan knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that Gregory Shaw was not just an observer. He was a predator who had just scented blood in the water. The days following Gregory Shaw's visit were fraught with tension. The easy camaraderie Ethan had built with Izzy was replaced by a strained, awkward silence. He was no longer just Ethan the dishwasher. He was Ethan Vance, the billionaire's son, playing a poverty game. She felt deceived a pawn in some twisted family drama she didn't understand. Why didn't you tell me? She finally asked him 2 days later as they were closing up the diner late one night. I couldn't, Ethan said, his voice weary. It was part of the deal, part of the test. If I used my name, I'd fail. So this is all just a game to you, she shot back, her voice sharp with hurt. You get to play at being poor for a month and then go back to your penthouse, and I'm still here working 2 jobs to pay for tuition. Is this some kind of poverty tourism for the rich? No, Ethan insisted, stepping closer. It wasn't like that. At first maybe, but not anymore. What I've learned here from you, it's real. This place is real. You're real. It's the most real thing in my life. His sincerity chipped away at her anger, but the wall between them remained. The trust had been broken. Meanwhile, Ethan was consumed by a gnawing dread. He knew Shaw would not let this go. The man's ambition was a cancerous thing, and he would use any tool at his disposal to advance his position. The final day of his test, September 22nd, was only a week away. His fears were realized the following Friday. It was the busiest night of the week. The diner was packed. The kitchen was in a state of controlled chaos, and Ethan was working at a frantic pace in the dish pit. Suddenly, 2 men in dark suits and health inspector badges walked in. They moved with an unnerving purpose, their eyes scanning every corner of the establishment. They went straight for the kitchen. Frank, who ran a meticulously clean operation, was unfazed at first, but the inspectors were relentless. They found things minor, insignificant infractions that were usually overlooked. A hairline crack in a floor tile behind the freezer, a box of onions stored 6 inches too low on a shelf. The temperature of the dishwasher's final rinse cycle was, they claimed, 2 degrees below the required minimum. It was a targeted assassination. Ethan knew with absolute certainty that this was Shaw's doing. A well-placed anonymous tip from a concerned citizen was all it would take. Shaw wasn't just trying to make Ethan look bad. He was trying to destroy the one place where Ethan had found a sense of purpose. The lead inspector, a man with a severe face and a clipboard, declared his verdict. "We're shutting you down, effective immediately. You'll have to remain closed until all these violations are corrected and a follow-up inspection is completed." Panic erupted. The owner, a kind elderly man named Mr. Chen, who usually only came in to check the books, arrived looking distraught. Closing for a week, maybe 2, would be a financial catastrophe. For a small business like the Corner Spoon, it could be a death blow. Izzy's face was pale. This wasn't just her job, it was the diner's family. It was Maria's livelihood, Frank's pride. Ethan watched the devastation ripple through the small restaurant, and a cold fury unlike anything he had ever felt washed over him. This was his fault. His past, his name had brought this plague upon these good people. This was the real test, not his father's arbitrary 30-day survival challenge. The real test was right here in this moment. What would he do? The old Ethan would have walked away detached and cynical. The new Ethan, the one forged in the heat of the dish pit, couldn't. He walked over to Mr. Chen and the inspector. "Sir," he said to the inspector, his voice clear and commanding, "these are minor issues. We can fix them immediately. A cracked tile and a box of onions shouldn't shut down a business that has served this community for 40 years. The inspector sneered. "Rules are rules, son. We'll be back in a week. Maybe." Ethan looked at the faces around him, Izzy's filled with despair, Mr. Chen's etched with worry, Frank's radiating helpless rage. He had one card to play. It was the one thing he was forbidden from using. Using it meant failing his father's test. It meant being disinherited, cast out forever. But not using it meant failing Izzy's test, the test of character, of standing for something more than yourself. He made his choice. He pulled out the cheap prepaid phone he'd bought with his first week's wages and dialed a number he knew by heart, the number for his father's personal lawyer. "This is Ethan Vance," he said into the phone, his voice steady. The kitchen went quiet as everyone turned to stare at him. "I need you to make a call to the head of the New York State Department of Health. I have reason to believe one of his inspectors in Albany is being manipulated for a corporate vendetta. Yes, Vance Global Corporate. I need this shut down immediately." He listened for a moment, then continued. "No, I don't care about the consequences for me. The business is called the Corner Spoon. Just make it go away." He hung up. The 2 inspectors looked at him, their smug expressions faltering. 5 minutes later, the lead inspector's phone rang. He listened, his face growing paler with each passing second. "Yes, sir. I understand. My apologies, sir." He hung up and turned to his partner. "We're leaving." Without another word, they walked out of the diner. Silence. Then Mr. Chen let out a shaky breath. What just happened?" Before Ethan could answer, the front door of the diner opened again. Standing there silhouetted against the night was Sterling Vance. He was flanked by Gregory Shaw, who was wearing a triumphant, predatory smirk. Shaw had overplayed his hand. He hadn't just reported back to Sterling. He had likely framed this entire evening, goading Sterling to come and witness his son's final pathetic failure. A failure that would hopefully involve Ethan crawling back and begging for help. Sterling's cold eyes swept over the scene. The humble diner, the stunned staff and his son standing in the middle of it all dressed in a dishwasher's apron. "So," Sterling's voice boomed in the small space, "this is what it has come to. You failed. You used the family name, the company's power. The test is over." Shaw's smirk widened. This was the moment of his victory. But Ethan didn't flinch. He met his father's gaze, and for the first time there was no fear, no defiance, only a quiet, unshakable certainty. "You're wrong," Ethan said calmly. "I did fail your test, but I passed the one that matters." He gestured around the diner. "You wanted me to learn about value. I thought value was about profit and loss, about acquiring things. But it's not. It's about what you build, what you protect. This place, these people, they have value. A value your man—" He shot a look of pure contempt at Shaw. "Tried to destroy to score points with you." He turned to Izzy, who was watching him with a new, unreadable expression. "The most valuable thing I've learned is that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account. It's measured by their integrity, by their willingness to stand up for others." He looked back at his father. "So yes, I used your name. I used your power. I used it to protect people who have shown me more kindness and decency than I ever knew in your world. And I would do it again. You can have your company. You can have your billions. I choose this." He took off the stained apron and laid it carefully on the counter. It was a gesture of finality, a declaration of independence. Sterling Vance stared at his son, his granite expression unmoving. But something flickered in his eyes, something that no one, not even Shaw, could decipher. The final test had indeed ended, but the result was not what anyone had expected. The silence in the corner spoon was absolute, thick with tension. Gregory Shaw glanced between Sterling and Ethan, his triumphant smirk dissolving into anxious confusion. This was not the scene of a broken air he had orchestrated. Sterling stepped forward, his expensive shoes soft on the worn linoleum. His entire focus was on Ethan, his gaze sweeping over the dishwasher's apron and calloused hands. "You choose this?" Sterling repeated, his voice a low rumble. "This mediocrity." Before Ethan could reply, Izzy moved to his side, a silent partner facing down the Titan. She addressed Sterling directly, her voice clear and strong, devoid of fear. "You don't get it, do you? You see mediocrity. I see a community. You see a dishwasher. I see a man who learned the value of hard work, who earned the respect of everyone in this kitchen when he had nothing. You gave your son a test to see if he could survive. But he learned something more important. He learned how to live. He learned how to be part of something, not just own it." Sterling's gaze shifted to Izzy, appraising her with the same intensity he would a corporate rival. He saw no weakness, only a conviction as solid as his own. He looked back at his son, truly seeing him for the first time. The lazy arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. His son hadn't just found a job. He had found a place. He had earned respect, not inherited it. "Shaw," Sterling said, his voice turning to ice. "Yes, Mr. Vance." Gregory responded eagerly, sensing a verdict. "You arranged for the health inspection." I merely expressed concern for Ethan's well-being, that he was in an unsanitary. You used company resources and influence to attack a private citizen's business, to manipulate a personal family matter." Sterling stated each word a hammer blow. "You leveraged my name not for the good of the company, but for your own pathetic games. You are a liability. Clean out your desk. You're fired." Shaw's face went white. Stunned into silence, he turned and slinked out of the diner, his grand victory having imploded into a career-ending disaster. Sterling turned his attention back to his son. "The test is over," he said again, but his tone had changed. "You failed to follow the rules, but you succeeded in the objective. It was never about the money, it was about character. I built an empire, but I was failing to build a legacy. An empire can be lost. Character, endures. He reached into his jacket, bypassing his wallet for a business card. He handed it not to Ethan, but to Mr. Chen. My family caused you and your business trouble tonight. My financial advisor will call you. Any damages, any lost revenue, we will make it right. I want to fund a complete renovation of this diner. Whatever you need. No strings attached. Mr. Chen, speechless, simply nodded. Finally, Sterling faced Ethan. The doors to Vance Global are open to you. Not as my son, but as a man who has learned the cost of things. We could build a new kind of legacy together. It was the offer Ethan had on some level always wanted to hear, an acknowledgement, an acceptance. He looked at his father, the corporate titan, and for the first time he saw the man underneath. Then he looked at Izzy, at the warm, worn-out diner that had become his sanctuary and his classroom. The choice was between a throne on the 80th floor and a foundation on the ground. "Thank you, Father," Ethan said, and the words were genuine. "But I think my legacy is going to start here." He turned to Izzy. "You said you were interested in a different kind of wealth. What if we built it together, a social enterprise? A community kitchen that offers job training to people who've fallen on hard times. A place that gives people the same chance you gave me." A slow, brilliant smile spread across Izzy's face. "Now that," she said, "sounds like a business with a real return on investment." Sterling watched them, a complex mixture of pride and loss in his eyes. He had sent his son out to learn how to be a king, and instead his son had learned how to be a man. He gave a single slow nod of acceptance. He turned and walked out of the corner spoon, leaving Ethan not in the wreckage of a failed test, but in the heart of a new beginning. That single lesson learned in the steam and clatter of a diner kitchen reshaped a dynasty. Ethan Vance never returned to the 80th floor. Instead, he and Izzy Rossi co-founded the Spoon Collaborative, a series of community-focused cafes that provided jobs and culinary training for the underprivileged. He brought his knowledge of systems and scalability, and she brought her deep understanding of human dignity and social impact. They created a new kind of empire, one measured not in stock prices but in lives changed. The story of the billionaire's son and the waitress became a quiet legend, a reminder that true wealth has nothing to do with what's in your bank account and everything to do with the value you create in the lives of others. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about the unexpected moments that define us. Comment below, what's the most valuable lesson you've ever learned from an unlikely teacher? We'd love to hear your story.